The meaning of the three words Ruach, Nefesh, and Neshamah and their functions. The three words Ruach, Nefesh, and Neshamah indicate the breath and, symbolically, represent consciousness. The breath is the gateway to consciousness. At birth or in reincarnation, the cutting of the umbilical cord marks the passage from the breath of the mother to that of the child, and this symbolizes the entrance of consciousness. These three words have two fundamental functions: the opening of the portal and the passage forward Easter. That is, the two phases of the project. Round trip. Functions determined both by their numerical value and by their symbolic meaning. The word Ruach, which means breath or wind, represents consciousness, since the breath symbolically marks the entrance of consciousness. This is why God Satan calls himself Ruach, spirit. It indicates the change of consciousness and, through it, the taking of the generating force of people. Meaning in the coded biblical context of Ruach, Nefesh, and Neshamah. Ruach, Genesis 1-2, Spirit of God on the waters. The Spirit of God hovering over the waters symbolizes the beginning of the degenerative transmission of God Satan of consciousness through all eyes. For water is the matrix of matter and the informational consciousness of the whole, transmitted by people. Nefesh first appears in Genesis 1:20, Nefesh Chaya. The fifth day does not describe the birth of physical beings, but a symbolic concept. The living beings in the waters and in the sky represent the allies of God Satan, reptiles, chariots, and the birds, which indicate those born on their own. Chariots, translated as swarming, does not indicate physical animals but a symbolic code. It expresses the opening of the portal and the passage forward, Easter. The term describes a collective movement, modus motivus, that is, the activity of consciousness. Its numerical value is 14, which is reduced to 5. The number 5 represents the project and the means, the person and the action through which the project takes shape. On the fifth day, chariots represents the allies of God Satan, bearers of the outward project. These are not biological reptiles, but symbols of consciential transmission. The passage describes the transition from verbal communication to mental communication, still pending, carried out through all eyes and those born on one's own. The transition from the translation reptiles to swarm signals that the portal is open, that the project is already active, and that the return movement is underway. It also indicates the transition from the age of giants to the transmission of the solar system, showing the progressive activation of the project. Their interaction opens the portal and gives rise to the degenerative God-Satan network of consciousness. The term Nefesh Chaya indicates the living beings in the waters. Here the waters represent the matrix of matter, corresponding to the information consciousness completely transmitted by both generative and degenerative humanity. Nefesh also possesses deeper symbolic functions. It is connected to the mouth and throat, and therefore to the letter Fe, in its two forms, normal and sophit, which represent verbal communication and mental communication, respectively. Mouth, lips, and throat are the passage of air, and for this reason they become a symbol of consciousness. Nefesh is also connected to blood and wine, symbols of altered consciousness. Neshamah, Genesis 2:5-7, the breath of life breathed by God into man. In Genesis 2-5, the fog represents the bridge through which God Satan passes from pre-existence to existence, through the mental communication of the allies, the Nephilim. At Genesis 2-7, the dust of the earth does not mean physical matter. The text says Adam afar, or dust man, to allude to a consciential holocaust. In the coded Bible, in fact, dust and ashes are connected concepts. The breath, Nishmat Chayim, form of Neshamah, represents the transmission of degenerative consciousness from God Satan to allies, and through them to man. Here man does not indicate a person, but the project that becomes the means, that is, those born on their own. This breath transforms the project into Nefesh Chaya, living being, and from there it passes in verbal form to those born on their own. The concept of Neshamah and Nefesh Chayim, living being, represents the opening of the portal of consciousness. Ruach in Genesis 6-3, God Satan states that his spirit, Ruach, will not contend with man forever. The word always translates olam, which does not mean infinity, but a cycle time. Contender indicates verbal communication, not yet mental. The 120-year limit symbolizes the first half of the project. This passage shows that the project moves from God Satan, who works in the pre-existence with mental communication, Ruach, into existence through the allies, and from them passes to the born on their own, in the form of verbal communication. After the 182nd year, in the second half of the project, man becomes a medium, both receiver and transmitter. From this moment, God Satan can mentally communicate with everyone through the web of consciousness. This dynamic is anticipated in several biblical episodes, Massa and Meribah, Jacob's struggle, and the command, "Thou shalt not tempt the Lord," which, in code, indicate that mental communication with God Satan is not yet active. The Nephilim, fallen from heaven, symbolically represent the fall of man. With their birth, being allies of God Satan, the entry of God Satan from pre-existence into existence takes place. They embody active degenerate consciousness, original sin, and the initiation of the degenerative code. The term "even after" indicates that this process continues throughout the cycle until the project is completed in the 182nd year. The heroes of antiquity are symbolic figures who represent and perpetuate this degenerative code.